The old state line is just a shadow of what it was during its glory days. Almost nothing remains there now. Only a concrete slab exists where the busy Shamrock restaurant once sat. About the same can be said for the motel. A skeleton of the old White Irish still stands after it was heavily damaged by fire some years ago. Almost everything is gone now. What used to be a busy Highway 45 is now quiet, with only local traffic using the stretch of pavement. Now, it wasn't Sheriff PUSSER that shut down this area, but rather the end of Prohibition and the relocation of Highway 45, just a short ways to the west of here. Now, all the local historians and experts will give BUFORD PUSSER credit for closing down the state line, but that's not how it happened. Now, they'll say if you didn't live here, if you weren't here back in those days, you don't know what actually happened. Well, I would submit to you that these local historians and experts don't have a clue themselves. If they're giving BUFORD PUSSER credit for closing down the state line, they should be able to name an establishment he actually closed down or a state liner he sent to prison. The real state line story is different from the one that they will tell. Let's take a look at it. Here we are at the Tennessee state line where it joins Mississippi. Now, this was the infamous state line area. Now, at that time, the Plantation Club sat over here in Mississippi, while the Shamrock restaurant sat right here, and the motel sat on the Tennessee side of the line right over there. Now, directly behind me is where the Shamrock Motel office was. On the morning of February 1st, 1966, Sheriff PUSSER received a call that there was a theft down here. The night before, George and Dorothy Vogel were returning from the Gulf Coast to their home up in Illinois. And weather was very inclement at the time. They'd had one of the worst winter days that they had had in 100 years here. Roads were supposed to be iced over, things of that nature, and the night before, George and Dorothy had decided to spend the night here at this motel. They ate over there at the restaurant the evening before, and then returned, went to their room down here, and the next morning, when they woke, they felt groggy. They thought they had been drugged. When they looked around, they noticed that Dorothy's purse was missing, so they went up to report it to whoever was in the office, which happened that morning to be Louise. And they said that she was drunk, threatened their lives, everything, when they reported what they had to say. So it was at that time that they called Sheriff PUSSER. Well, the sheriff came down with two deputies, his chief deputy, Jim Moffitt, and Petey Plunk. Now, when they arrived, they went in. Jim sat down on the couch, and BUFORD talked to Louise. And I suppose that Petey was inside the office with them. At any rate, BUFORD had two warrants. One was a search warrant for intoxicating liquors. The other was a search warrant for the purse, stolen property. Well, Louise, knowing that she could be arrested, allegedly told BUFORD, well, step into my living quarters here and I'll tell you what's going on down here at the state line, which made no sense because she was the only one still operating at the state line. W.O. Hathcock had been out of business for almost about 2 years because there in Alcorn County, they decided that they just wouldn't renew a lot of liquor licenses, and W.O.'s happened to be one of those. Jack had been killed by this time. Towhead was in prison for the 3-state moonshine operation down in Tishomingo County. So that left only Louise as the surviving person here at the immediate state line. So Buford stepped into the room with her, and they started to close the door, but there was dry cleaning that was hanging on the door, and that kept the door from closing completely. The chief deputy stepped into the hallway, and he could hear what was going on in that room, but he could not see it. 2 other individuals were in that kitchenette living room area that I spoke of, and they could hear what was going on. Well, Buford's version of this was that when they got in there, Louise cussed him, pulled the gun, fired a shot. As he fell to her bed, the bullet penetrated the window and went out into an awning post that was right here where the motel office was, outside it. He said he drew his weapon, and as he did, she straddled over him to fire a second round, and it fell on a bad round. The hammer fell on a bad round. So he opened fire with a .41 Magnum, and he said his first shot nipped her in the shoulder, that his second shot hit her torso, and he didn't say much about the third shot, which was to the head. Now, the thing that is odd about that is that the people in the back room reported hearing Buford's gunfire first, all of its rounds, and then later heard the single pop from Louise's little .38. When we saw her autopsy report, it conflicted with what Buford said, because it shows that the first round was to the neck and shoulder area. However, the entry point was on the back side of the shoulder, the posterior side, as was the second shot, which struck her right below the left shoulder blade and exited out under her right breast. The third shot that Buford wouldn't really talk about occurred while she was laying on the floor, and we know this because some of her teeth were embedded in the carpet behind her head. So if you take what Howard Carroll, one of the individuals in the back room, said, along with what happened later with Jim Moffitt, Jim would go home after that night, and being there when the shooting occurred, he didn't see it, but he did hear it. And that night when he got home, he told his oldest son, who was on leave from the military, and his own wife, if anything ever happens to me, you don't need to look any further than Buford Pusser, which makes a lot of us wonder exactly what Jim Moffitt heard. It's a real question. So there you have it, folks. The real story of the state line. What do you think? Did Buford clean up the state line, or did history simply take another course? I would appreciate it if you'd leave your comments and questions with this video. I'd like to know what you think, answer what I can, and get into a discussion about these things. I hope you've enjoyed this walk back through history, and hope you'll join me again. Until then, just remember, truth has no agenda.